To understand Bram Stoker's Dracula, you have to first understand how the story is told. It isn't a traditional narrative with a single narrator. Instead, it's a collection of documents, journals, letters, telegrams, and even phonograph recordings. This epistolary style gives the whole book a sense of documentary realism, almost like a modern found footage film. It makes the horror feel less like a fairy tale and more like a series of eyewitness accounts from people who were actually there, trying to make sense of something that shouldn't exist. The story begins with Jonathan Harker, a young English solicitor, traveling to the Carpathian Mountains to finalize some real estate transactions for Count Dracula. At first, the Count seems to be a polite, albeit eccentric host. But as Jonathan stays in the castle, the atmosphere shifts from mere oddity to genuine terror. He realizes he isn't a guest, but a prisoner. He observes things that defy logic. The Count has no reflection in the mirror, he has superhuman strength, and he can transform into a lizard-like creature. The most chilling moment comes when Jonathan witnesses the Count interacting with 3 beautiful, predatory vampire women. He realizes that the Count isn't just a man with strange habits, he is something ancient and hungry. Jonathan eventually manages to escape the castle, but he is left physically and mentally broken by the experience. As the story moves from the remote mountains of Transylvania to the bustling streets of England, the horror becomes more domestic and widespread. A ghost ship called the Demeter drifts into the port of Whitby, its crew all dead or missing. On board is the Count, who has successfully made his way to English soil. His presence begins to affect the people around him, specifically a young woman named Lucy Westenra. Lucy begins to suffer from a mysterious, wasting illness. She becomes pale and sleep-weak, and despite the best efforts of her suitor, Arthur Holmwood, and her doctor, John Seward, she continues to decline. Dr. Seward is a man of science, a man who believes everything has a rational, medical explanation. He is baffled by Lucy's condition. It is only when Professor Abraham Van Helsing enters the picture that the true nature of the threat is understood. Van Helsing is the bridge between the modern world and the ancient one. He understands the science of medicine, but he also understands the reality of superstition and the supernatural. Van Helsing realizes that Lucy is being fed upon by a vampire. They try everything, blood transfusions, garlic, even crucifixes, but the predator is too persistent. Eventually, Lucy dies, but she doesn't stay dead. She becomes a vampire bride, a creature of the night who begins to prey on children. This is a turning point for the group. They realize that to save the souls of their loved ones, they must commit a grim, necessary act of violence. They track Lucy to her tomb and perform the ritual of staking her, which finally allows her to rest in peace, though her corpse is left with a haunting, unnatural beauty. This loss changes the stakes. The group, now consisting of Jonathan, Mina, Dr. Seward, Arthur, and a brave American named Quincy Morris, unites to hunt the Count. They realize Dracula is not just a mindless beast, but a sophisticated, intelligent strategist. He is moving through London, systematically establishing refuges for himself by moving boxes of his native Transylvanian earth into various locations. During their investigation, something terrifying happens. Dracula targets Mina. In an attempt to create a permanent connection to the mortal world, he forces her to drink his blood. This act creates a psychic link between them. It's a double-edged sword. On one hand, it leaves Mina vulnerable to Dracula's mental influence, making her feel the pull of his darkness. On the other hand, it gives the group a way to track him. Van Helsing learns how to use Mina as a medium, allowing them to sense Dracula's location and his movements through her mind. The hunt becomes a desperate race against time. The group realizes they cannot win a war of attrition in London, they have to strike at the source. They trace Dracula's movements back to his homeland in Transylvania. In a final, frantic pursuit, they intercept a caravan of gypsies who are transporting Dracula's coffin. The climax takes place at sunset. In a violent, chaotic confrontation, the group manages to intercept the Count. Jonathan Harker and Quincy Morris strike Dracula with knives, and the vampire crumbles into dust, finally destroyed. But the victory comes at a heavy price. Quincy Morris is mortally wounded during the struggle and dies, leaving the survivors to deal with the weight of their victory. The story ends with an epilogue set 7 years later, where the survivors reflect on the lives lost and the sheer terror they survived. When we look back at Dracula, it's easy to see why it has become the definitive vampire story, but the book is doing a lot more than just providing scares. One of the most fascinating elements is the tension between science and superstition. You see this clearly in the relationship between Dr. Seward and Van Helsing. Seward represents the Victorian belief that the world can be mastered through medicine and logic. He is genuinely distressed by anything he cannot categorize. Van Helsing, however, represents the recognition that the modern world is still haunted by ancient primal forces that science isn't equipped to handle. The struggle to defeat Dracula is, in many ways, a struggle to reconcile these two ways of seeing the world. This tension also extends to the technology of the era. The protagonists use the cutting-edge tools of the late 19th century to fight the Count. They use typewriters, phonographs, and steam launches. There is something profoundly symbolic about using the tools of modernity, the very things that were supposed to make the world safe and explained, to hunt a creature that is the embodiment of ancient prehistoric evil. It's a clash between the new world and the old. We also see a significant shift in how gender is portrayed, particularly through the character of Mina Harker. In the Victorian era, women were often relegated to the domestic sphere, but Mina is the intellectual heart of the group. She is highly capable, using shorthand and meticulous record-keeping to organize the information the men collect. She isn't just a damsel in distress, she is a vital strategic asset. Even when she is under Dracula's psychic influence, her intellect and her willpower are what ultimately allow the group to track him. She represents the new woman of the era, someone who is stepping into more active, intellectual roles, even as the narrative uses her connection to Dracula to explore themes of female vulnerability and temptation. Then there is the central metaphor of blood. In the novel, blood is everything. It is the biological necessity of life, but it is also used as a metaphor for kinship, marriage, and spiritual connection. When Dracula drinks blood, he is performing a perverted version of a religious sacrament or a marriage vow. He is attempting to create a dark kind of family, a lineage of the undead. The horror of Dracula isn't just that he kills, it's that he attempts to incorporate his victims into his own existence, blurring the lines between the individual and the predator. The epistolary format itself serves to reinforce these themes. By presenting the story through fragmented pieces of evidence, Stoker forces the reader to do the work of a detective. We are piecing together the truth alongside the characters. This creates a sense of mounting dread because we often see the danger approaching before the characters do, or we see the aftermath of an event through a letter, leaving the most violent moments to our imagination. It makes the supernatural feel grounded in a very tangible, very human reality. Ultimately, Dracula is a story about the fear of the outsider. He is a stranger who enters a modern, organized society and begins to subvert it, using its own structures, its houses, its transport, its people, to hide his ancient hunger. He represents the fear that despite all our scientific progress, all our steam engines and telegraphs, there are still shadows in the corners of the world that we cannot control. The victory of the characters is a victory for the modern world, but it's a bittersweet one, leaving them forever changed by the darkness they had to confront.